Hello, everyone, and welcome to another UFOB interview. Today we have UAP Med. The founder of UAP Med is Ted Rowe, who, if you'll remember, 2 years ago we interviewed Ted, and he is the co-founder of NARCAP.org. NARCAP is the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomenon, which was founded back in 1999 with Dr. Haynes, who was the founder. He now has UAP Med, which he started up in around 2022. We have two other members from UAP Med. One is Ben Paramonte, and his background is in pharmacology, toxicology, and biomedical writing. The other person is Ron Westrom, who has 50 years of research in sciences. He has a BA cum laude in social relations, a PhD in sociology, and he's authored several books. He was a MUFON consultant, and I'll leave the link in the description so you can read more on Ron. And unfortunately, we didn't get to talk to Ron. He had some network issues and we never got to talk to him. So we're going to try to get him on an interview just with himself, because he has been in the business for 50 years of research. So he'll be a very, very interesting interview. And of course, we have our co-host, the holographic Adam. Adam has a master's in research psychology. Always happy that Adam's here to ask some really good questions, especially with UAP Med, since UAP Med's here to inform the professionals in psychology and therapy, and he has some great questions for us coming up. So thank you very much and enjoy the interview. Hello, Ted. Hello, Ben. And hello, Ron. Thank you guys very much for coming to UFOB today. We're excited to talk about UAP Med. And to start, let's just start with Ted. Ted, can you let us know how you've been since narcap.org and what you've been doing since then?
Well, it's good to be here, and I've been working on NARCAP continuously, even to the present day. We're going on 25 years now, and in the process, in 2021, I was invited to set up a program at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics focused on UAP and aviation safety, which I did, and I participate as a steering group member with that organization. And then in May of 2022, I set up a program called UAP Med, and with the intent of informing professionals, psychology, medical, community safety and wellness professionals about UAP, and getting them to start thinking about what needs to be done in order to mitigate the psychosocial impact of UAP exposures on our societies. In general, we know that there's basically two types of UAP exposure. You see one at a distance and it flies by, and you kind of cope with it one way or another. And then the other way is to have an encounter with it, an experience with it, interactive exposure. And while we're really good at talking about the first one, the second one is a difficult topic for our society. And Ron would know that even better than I do. Ron is a sociologist and came on board with UAP Med about a year ago with his own research. He's been involved with this for many years. And then, and Ben, of course, is one of our team leads at UAP Med, and is a prime driver actually for a lot of our publication work. So that's it in a nutshell.
Ben, actually, if you wouldn't mind, tell us how you found UAP Med, or Ted found you.
Yeah, so last November-ish, I was online looking for information about UAPs and NHI in regards to how people are dealing with sightings, ontological shock, all of those kind of psychological and psychosocial impacts, because I've seen stuff out here. As you know, this area can be pretty hot. And when I did have our first sighting, and me and my wife had our first sighting in Berkeley, it really threw us for a loop. Like one of those things where you were interested in it as a kid. I moved on, got a degree in pharmacology, toxicology, medical writing, moved on, I guess, quote unquote, in my life. And then you see it and you can't deny it. And so throughout that year, kind of just, dealing with it. And then I came across UAP Med. I believe it was on It might have been on Reddit, it might have been on Twitter, but it was a social media post. And once I saw that, I was like, I got to reach out to these folks here because they're doing something that I don't know anyone else is doing, and just kind of offered my services as a writer, my background in science and medicine and all that good stuff. So a few months later, February comes around, and I was invited to join and come on the team, and I've been there since then. And it's been great. We've gotten some really good publications out and met really, really wonderful people. We have a really wonderful team, really diverse team, and for someone who got started in this many, many years ago as a kid with Robert Stack and the Allagash episode and getting freaked out, and then coming back to it years later, based on a personal experience, has been it's been a very interesting ride, and I'm very glad to be part of this group because, I think what we're doing here is something that's going to be needed now, before, and definitely as more and more comes out into the public specter and view. I think a lot of folks are going to be looking for a group like UAP Med to kind of talk to, and also helping professionals. I think of a lot of the professionals that our audience is, that we are trying to talk to and help them get up to speed and be ready when someone comes into, let's say, their office for an acute exposure, or they talk to a mental health practitioner and they have a psychological effect that they're kind of handling. And so that's kind of how I came aboard and have been here since then.
Yeah, that's great. And for me, it also points out that this UAP Med is also kind of a few steps ahead of the initial disclosure we're all hoping and waiting for, because this has to do with also abduction and contact. So it's a little step ahead of just, okay, NHI are here, now what? So yeah. So thank you, Ben, for that. So Ted, tell us how UAP Med has been expanding, and what you've been able to do, who you've been able to reach when it comes to the professionals in psychiatry and psychology.
Well, it started with trying to get some of those folks on board, and we lucked out. Dr. Keith Taylor joined our group. He's a law enforcement professor at John Jay CUNY. And he's also, I think he's a deputy sheriff of Suffolk County now. Is that correct, Ben? I think that's right. He had an idea for making recommendations available for incident commanders and first responders around UAP incidents. So we got a little working group get together to help support him to write that paper, which we did, and we put it out as I think it was including UAP incidents and first responder procedures, protocols, and practices, something like that. So we got that done, and it happened fairly quickly. It took us about 8 weeks to bang it out and get it done at professional grade. The organization itself went through some growing pains as we were trying to onboard professionals. And it started with people that were more motivated from heart, and then we had a bit of attrition, and then we brought on more professionals, and now we have a pretty good collection of clinicians and academics and project managers and the kind of people that can actually move an organizational initiative. So that's our process right now, and we're getting ready for a rollout. We just did an experiencer Bill of Rights to help tell people what they should be able to expect when they say they have had a UAP exposure. And we have some other things coming out shortly.
Yeah, here's the UAP Bill of Rights. Here, do you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Yes. Yeah, and the Bill of Rights is it's very interesting. Right to information, right to investigation, right to recognition, right to safety and security, right to privacy, right to physical care, right to mental health, right to professional guidance, right to healing and recovery, and right to informed consent. And those are really important, especially for people that I mean, and we're still in the age of ridicule, and still in the age of people definitely not believing, and I know that getting people on board must be a it's an ominous task, I would think, but I'm sure, as you said, it's starting to is it starting to get easier? Is it starting to get? Is it still difficult? Tell
Well,
me.
we're starting to get people stepping up that have the credentials to do the work. We have some initiatives that I can't really talk about yet that'll be probably game changers based on the professionals that are doing the job. And those will be coming out soon. The general attention has been good. Okay, we've had psychologists and psychiatrists volunteering time to help us review our materials, to give us clinical guidance in our review, and help us know which buttons to push and kind of how to approach. We've had some initiatives moving towards APA and others, and so we've been kind of in a formative stage with all of that. And we've been involved with other things. We helped set up some student programs at Tulane and Yale, helping them develop their own programs. For all of these kids are going to be professionals when they get out into the world, and they'll have there are UAP clubs that are standing up now to help inform them on what they need to know going into the field.
That's really interesting. So you said at Yale and Tulane?
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. How large are the groups, and are any of them experiencers as well, or have had exposure?
Well, yeah. To answer the second question, they're 30 to 50 members, and all of this is kind of showing that there's a stigma in society, but there's also some pushback against it. And there are some people who are well enough qualified that they can use their professional skills and see that there is something going on here that needs to be addressed. Others might be skeptical. A lot of people, like doctors, have their own medical societies, their own professional boards and stuff to deal with. So they're very careful about being associated with fringy things. But psychologists have a little more room to wiggle, kind of depending on where they are. And some of them are quite brilliant. So their support has been really helpful in moving our process forward. We also have international partners that we work with. There's a group in the UK called Unhidden with fairly similar goals, but they're in a different environment. They have a different stigma map, I guess you would call it. So the things they're pushing against are different than ours. And an example is you can't really approach a member of parliament or their staff with an issue like you can here in the U.S., where you can go to the Tim Burchett staff or somebody and make a presentation to them and have a chance of having that information considered or moved around. So they've got another problem over there to deal with. But as a coalition, we can support each other.
Great. I know one of our moderators and experiencers at the Discord, Caspian, who lives in the UK, has said this pretty much the same thing. Over there, it's a different jar of worms there,
Yeah.
or a different can of worms. They just don't even, well, for the most part, don't talk about it and don't think anything's going on. So yeah, it's difficult.
Well, it's like a lot of these things that, and I'm hoping we can get Ron in here to hold on this, because it's an idea that Ron brought up, which is that the idea of the fallacy of centrality, meaning the central authority knows everything, and that's a fallacy, right? So you go to them and they say, well, if this is happening, we would know about it, but they don't know about it. So why don't they know about it? Yes. I've had this with pilots, right? I go to an elected official for an aviation union and have a pilot say, or have that official say to me, well, if this was happening, don't you think I'd know about it? And I'm sitting, but how would he know about it? and Ron can illustrate this even better. But if you don't go and ask the pilots, if you don't have a questionnaire that includes UAP exposures for your psychological patients, if you're a doctor in an emergency room and you don't talk to that person who's telling you, you just assume they have schizophrenia or something, you don't get that information. You don't get the data. So this is something we're trying to reverse through UAP Med, and our work here is to try and encourage the professions and academics to engage and bring their skill set to the subject.
Well, and thank goodness you guys are here for that. It's important because these times are, I mean, we're getting more whistleblowers and more people talking about it. So it's definitely getting in the view of regular people, if I should say that. Adam, do you have any questions as of yet?
Just because I know you mentioned pretty much like psychology or, any type of like clinician or psychologist, there definitely is some more leeway into, anomalous experiences, consciousness phenomenon, just because, the foundation is generally speaking about the mind. So I'm curious as to what led some of these, because even through, I guess you could say like mainstream clinical practices, if you disclose, any type of experience with NHI or UFO, you might get some, red flags go up in the clinicians' radar. However, not every clinician. There are, probably more now than ever that are more accepting and more, open-minded about, the phenomenon that's been happening. So I'm just curious if there's any like, different perspectives about the clinicians, like kind of associated with UAP Med, or what kind of brought them to, this direction, because it's certainly not traditional, but definitely more open than, maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Well, to me, I think most clinicians can just look at the environment and see that they're needed. You've got politicians kind of shrilly sharing hard facts or hard information, not necessarily facts, but hard information about UAP and NHI and about human overlap with them, and how sometimes it's not good and not safe, and and worse. So they aren't really measuring or tempering their messaging, and vulnerable populations trigger on this. And there are pathologies that include UFO ideation, right? That the people aren't sick. I mean, the people are sick and they aren't seeing UFOs. Then you have people who are sick who are seeing UFOs, and pardon me. So it's a complex situation, and therapists can kind of see that they're needed. It's really about the context. Where are we needed? How are we needed? And in that process, to develop the diagnostics and the differential diagnostics, so that you can tell one from another. Ask the questions, screen the clients so that if there is an indicator of an exposure, you would know about it. It's about trying to help. And so the whole point is to get people to engage, and a lot of them are realizing this. They're seeing it in that perspective. They understand that these exposures can be traumatic, and they can lead to an ontological shock where a person just really doesn't function well for a long period of time. And I've been through all of that myself personally, and that's kind of why I set up UAP Med. Was I could see that the people I was working with weren't ready for where this takes them. And then you have, other problems like, people who are grandstanding. You've got sociopaths that want to be up in front, and they've got to be the one, and, they're carrying the message and they're the flag, and, and then when these people fall, then you have disillusionment, of a different kind, so, I've tried to hold an independence from all of that, and really focus on serving academics and professionals with the hope of serving patients, people that like us, that have exposure.
Ben, do you have anything you'd like to tag on to what Ted was just talking about?
Sure. one of the things that I think is very interesting in communicating to professionals, whether they be doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, generalists, specialists, is that is the communication that there is good information out there. And point being, in the past, I would say 2 to 5 years, there's been a number of journal articles that have been published, mostly from the psychological and sociological POV. But point being is those articles have come out and provided data to start looking at different patient populations, seeing the kind of patterns that are being developed. So like Ted was saying, if you go in and say, if I go in and say, like I've had an experienced psychologist, how do we talk about this? What I think is really going to be great that's happening is the information that's coming through is really that differential diagnosis now. That's what we're starting to actually see in these papers. What we're starting to see is, for example, I would say, what was the data point I remember is that about 50% of experiencers, right, may have an underlying condition. But at the same time, people who are experiencers in another study do not show the same patterns of people with other mental health disorders that one would likely go to first when someone comes in and says, I had an NHI appear to me in my bedroom, or I was driving home and a UAP came by and I drove through a fog and now I don't know what happened for the past hour. And so I think what we're seeing is that the communication of the information that these professionals respond to and in the language that they recognize is going to be extremely helpful. And we're moving in that direction now. And I think it's a big part of what we're going to try to do here at UAP Med is to get that kind of information in a format for them. So they go to a conference, and if they see a group there or an organization that's representing, let's say, for example, UAP Med or another organization trying to help others with these effects, there is something for them to really latch onto. And I think that change, we're seeing it in action. We're seeing it happen over the past, again, 2 to 5 years, and those changes are going to be a big deal. Something for professionals to really latch their teeth onto, and then from there start asking the right questions. And if they're interested in going further, well, academia is there, research universities are there to kind of take that next step as well. And so what I see is this more clinical view coming into light and in a much more accepted way. And again, it's all how this is delivered and shared with these professionals, and in a way that helps them help their patients. And that's really, again, the end goal.
I think it'd be a good opportunity to kind of bring up the UAP Med Experiencer Survey, because I think it's kind of related to this topic in regards to really kind of just data points and measurement. And I was just kind of scanning through it, and there's there's a couple things that I can kind of jump out to me that slightly untraditional for other experiencer surveys. And of course, I really like the first two questions here, just kind of calling out really if you've related about your UAP experiences to like a professional, either be like mental health or like a mental health professional or like a doctor, say. I don't think that's like not something that's really measured. Like how is this being communicated? Is it even being communicated? I think that's really interesting. And then I'm also interested too in this survey, ask about blood type. So I was just curious about any background for that question, what really kind of like inspired that question here for the UAP Med Experiencer survey here. Just curious if there's any foundation for that question.
Well, yeah. You want to take that, Ben, or shall I?
I think you can take it, Ted. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, there's been an observation amongst in the abduction research community about blood types and abductees. And AB negative seems to be a common one. among abductees. It's a common blood type, but it seems to show up disproportionately. And so the only way to find out is to actually collect data and see if it's true or not. And then if it isn't, then what does the data tell you, if anything, that might be related to UAP or not? So you have to start somewhere, right? So start by asking a question. And then move forward from there. That's part of the medical side of what we do. We have basically a three-pronged approach. We do psychology and mental health, and then medical health, and then community safety and wellness to help first responders and others deal with people with these exposures. So that part of it. What's interesting, going back to your earlier question about professionals getting involved, is that professionals are often experiencers too. Had more than a few of them pop up with their PhDs that have something to say about it, and it's firsthand. And a lot of them are very circumspect about it. The way I had to be, if you're going to operate in a professional environment, you can't gush about your experiences and expect to take it seriously. At the same time, I've got enough experience when I talk, people listen because I've cultured my credibility in those groups. UAP exposures represent a cross-section of society. We have military people with exposures both on duty and off. In the context of their work and not in the context of their work, just we're in the military when that happened. This happened to me. And who are you going to call? When you have a UFO experience on your base, right? With one other person, right? But you can't go to base security and tell them there's been an incursion on base, and lock it up, pay attention. So people get stuck in these situations, but when you give them a chance to talk, whether they're a professional or an academic or just a working guy, if you give them a chance, they'll tell you, and you should listen. Not all of it's sane, but underlying a lot of it there is. You got to remember people are trying to cope. So a lot of the information you get, they're trying to stack it up themselves. But if you just go down to the root of it, just what happened, you can start learning things, and that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. Just to jump onto that too, Ted. Part of what you were saying earlier, right, was that this is a spectrum. We're looking at across society, all different individuals from different paths of life, different professions have had these exposures. To that point, we were just talking about publications earlier. Publication from 2 years ago was a nice population survey of academics who have had or have heard of all of the recent developments, wanting to know what their thoughts were. Well, if you look at that article, there's a little inset in there that talks to individuals in that survey who have either had an experience or have a family member or know someone who have had an experience, and they don't want to talk about it for the different reasons that they give. The other part that why we're doing what we're doing and asking some of these certain questions, Adam, is if you looked at the UAP Task Force 2021, 2022, and then AARO's release this past year, what they did was they created a situation where they put out into the public, this can happen, that can happen, and we're looking for health effects. But we're not going to provide anyone with any epidemiological data. We're not going to tell you where you should and shouldn't be hanging out if you don't want to be exposed to, let's say, radiation from a UAP, if that is indeed what's happening, right? It kind of leaves the public in a situation where we don't have the information, and therefore, when we're talking about that spectrum across society, it's not just folks walking down the street or at night in their yard looking up and something comes to them. It's professionals who are, again, maybe talking to these types of patients for the first time, or they experience something themselves. And again, without that data, what do they go to? What can they use to start helping their patients? And so I think that is probably one of the biggest parts of it, is that, for example, taking blood type, well, now we have another piece of information about people who may be being abducted, people who are having these closer encounters. We just don't know yet. And I think that's going to be a big part of it, is understanding the population of people and how it breaks out uh, with all of these UAP exposures and NHI exposures. So I think that's part of it too.
Adam, if you want to tag on to that, feel free. But I'm ready. I have a question from one of our experiencers that I think can go along with that. But Adam, do you have anything to?
No, really, just I think really communication between like the experiencer and just any type of medical professional. I think just capturing that is something that you don't really have a statistic on, and I think that's think the results might be surprising whenever the sample gets finalized or results are submitted or published. But I think just really just those two questions there, you get that percent. It's just like, whoa, like that's saying something. So just more justification to kind of dive into that and expand it if the the result is kind of what we expect.
Have you both been aware of CCRI with Ray Hernandez? We interviewed him recently, and he has the book Beyond UFOs as well as A Greater Reality, and they did a vast survey of people who have or experiencers. Have you either of you seen any of their information or data that they have there?
I personally haven't. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have. I'm aware of it. The problem with surveys,
Mm-hmm.
of course, is that you want to make sure that you don't have a convenient sample, or that if you do, you identify it as one, right? And a convenient sample means basically you're sampling from the population who's most likely to tell you information about something, versus talking to the general population with generalized questions and letting the answers to those questions bring you information without necessarily the people knowing about it. So, and Ray's an attorney. Okay, he's that's sort of his background. I tried to talk to him about his survey, his free survey, some time ago, and that wasn't forthcoming.
Okay,
but
all right.
So yeah, the assertion with Ray was about good or bad. Are these exposures
yes.
good or are they bad? If you wanted to kind of just get down to the root of it, and
Uh-huh.
and one of his talking points was that they come out 80% say they're great and 20% say they're bad. And of course, being somebody with experience myself, I dared to ask. 20% is a fairly significant number. I mean, are these the guys that the knockout beam isn't working on? Kind of like in a medical situation where anesthesia doesn't work on everybody, are there secondary issues in all of this? And I didn't even get a chance to talk to him about it. The information would be useful, I think, to a point, but we have a problem out here because there's a lot of claims being made. Oh, there's many kinds of aliens. Some are good, some are bad. All of this stuff, and that's not really what the data shows us. It's what the cultural zeitgeist is around the conversation, but the data itself doesn't really show us that. And if you go back to the roots of it, like Hynek did a presentation in 1977, and he defined what UAP exposures were like in Project Blue Book. And this was back before we had, the Pleiadian mission and all of these other cultural developments, cargo cults, for lack of a better term, and so when you go back to the root of it all, the root stays pretty much the same. And in my own exposures, I've been exposed to the core story. The core narrative has been my narrative. And that's it. A bunch of little gray guys showed up, and made my life miserable, and wasn't other beings and other mixtures of beings and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of information that's moving around out there that isn't substantiated, or at least isn't as long lived in the data as the basic narrative of Grays. So just all of these things kind of work around us. There's another part, the idea that this is a religious experience and that these beings represent divine beings, good or bad. You know, um, and that argument is a difficult one to give justice to, to fairly engage on. And of course, as our organization, we can't really come down on whether they're good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Our point is to help people cope with the exposure itself, and to encourage academics and professionals to bring their skill set into this to be able to help us figure out what intent might be and what we need to understand about this.
Okay, yeah, and that kind of just covered one of the questions here. What is UAP Med's view of UFOnautic intentions and their character and nature? And you kind of just hit on that. Your intention is to help people with the exposure itself, but if you want to put more answer to that question, feel free.
Okay, well, the question of intent, what they're up to, I can address two different ways. I can address it through UAP Med and say, we don't know, and that shouldn't have anything to do with a person getting help if they're having difficulty coping with an exposure. Okay. And then on the other side of it, as a person with exposures, I have a strong feeling about it that we have boundary issues. We're not able to get these guys to stand off and explain themselves, and that doesn't bode well. And then the chaos that this is leading to in our society shouldn't be underestimated either. I don't imagine that the whole world's going to burn down, but I think that it's going to cause problems. And when you have a planet made up of sociopaths and psychopaths that are in charge of everything,
Mm-hmm.
political, military, royalty, all of this stuff, we need a unified reaction on this on a global level, and I don't think we're mature enough to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
that's just my personal input on that.
Yeah. Okay. And I was going to add something to that, but it just left me. Okay. But Adam, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, it's definitely a question that kind of comes up, the intent of the NHI, but I really there's a lot of what ifs and there's a lot of variance and experiences about what these NHR and what they're really describing. But my take really is, I think the human species really needs to find a collective and to band together if we really want to tackle this issue. And I really think history speaks for itself, where the authorities have not helped in this situation. They've been very elusive and odd, and you can debate how involved they are in this. Because I kind of look at it like we're conscious beings on this planet Earth, but I don't think Earth is the only planet where this type of phenomena, this very elusive, very bizarre experience has happened. But I really think the only solution is really having the common person here, the human species, really to band together and really to disregard the narratives that have been kind of set and kind of pushed for a long time, and really just set and say, hey, we're actually in control of this. We're actually in control of this phenomenon in terms of information, and we just need to decipher ourselves and not just be spoon fed the information that's been what's been given to us. So I think that's really a big difference. So it's up to humanity as a collective. I'm not really too confident in humanity as a collective, but I do believe that's really the only, or one of the only solutions. But
yeah, and what I was gonna. Oh, I'm sorry, Ben. I'll let you go. Go
sure.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Adam, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you brought it up that way, because that idea of folks banding together, the average person on this planet, if a UAP is reported or an NHI is reported, if at all, from an average person, it takes 3 months. That's the average amount of time before they actually put a report in. And I think that idea of what you're getting to is getting rid of that stigma. That's something that is occurring in our world that we are encountering. can be reported on, can be investigated, can be looked at through the lens of science, can be looked at objectively, can be looked at through peer-reviewed research, and which is what, you know, our what we do here at UAP Med too is peer-reviewed work, taking that information, taking that solid data, and applying that objectively, whether the intent is, I guess, malevolent or helpful. Again, that is a subjective experience, and it's hard to, I think, capture that for each individual person. And the best we can do is start to get hard objective data, and from there kind of take that next step and let individuals have that to kind of think about it what they will and join together, and at the same time moving it up the chain and down the chain and ultimately across society, so everyone at any level, any demographic, any economic or social group can take that information, and if it's objective, they can apply it the way they would like to. But I think that's really what we're getting to, is getting rid of that stigma so all of these conversations can really start to happen. UAP Med, we are and want to be at the forefront of this and doing what we can to help that conversation continue, whether it's professional to professional, professional to experiencer, experiencer to experiencer. Having that conversation is what's going to get this really moving. And so I'm really glad you brought it up. Thanks.
Yeah, it's. I feel like a lot of the conversation gets brought into what, like the intent of NHI is and what they are, and that's like a very interesting conversation. But in terms of like actually, measuring that, very difficult outside of like something like CCRI, Ray Hernandez global survey. So what we can actually do more progress in, I think, is the collective of what information we kind of communicate and how we really take back really what's happening here. And I think it's really happening to a lot of people. And I know in my perspective, it really does. The military does seem to be highly involved, as it just seems to be whatever, for whatever reason. But I have my own I have my own opinions and speculations on that. But it does seem to be that it is a very, very big picture military and very secretive. But I think we can decipher some of the secrets if we start really just educating ourselves and really just putting that mantle into our own hands. So.
Yeah,
we can be a.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry, Leaf. Continue. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you go ahead. I'm just going to go off in another direction.
I was going to say, we're a very, very intuitive species. When we see something, we want to be able to either make it or take it apart, or understand how it works. And with this information coming out there and having it come out in a good way, a proper way, and a way for folks to digest, I think the human species will, each and every individual mind will find their way to be inquisitive about it, and where they take that, that's up to them. But I don't know. I have a faith in humanity in that way. We always want to know, and if we can't know, we want to find a way to know.
Yeah,
I guess.
It's a percentage of humanity.
Yeah,
I have a faith
That's
in.
true. That's true. That's true. But we're still here.
It's there. Yes, absolutely.
I feel that it's our responsibility as an organization to avoid speculation. Extrapolation is good if you've got something, a base to work from. At least it helps you guide some questions, and you can get some yes or no and make decisions around it. But speculation doesn't help. And being seen out in the public talking about speculative things doesn't help. And this is something that, it's kind of driven my own personal philosophy of running this organization the way I do, which is away from ufology, towards the mainstream. The majority of UFO exposures are never reported. So we need to find out what that is, what those numbers are, who those people are. We need to make an environment available for them so that they can talk about it. And ufology is not where to do that. And when I look at the so-called leaders in the field right now, I don't see responsibility in the way they speak, in the things they speak about. You know, understatement's kind of important here. Conservative engagement's important here. Um, you know, I wouldn't be caught dead talking about what I know or think I know about where they come from or what they do and why they do it. And, and rumors I've heard about whistleblowers saying X, Y, or Z, I just wouldn't be caught dead on that. I really wish, you know, well, I'm not going to go there. I'm not even going to go talk about that side of it. But the bottom line is that if you really think that there's a non-human intelligence engaging in our domain, um, take it seriously. And what is serious? You know, it isn't sitting around holding a flashlight in your chin, under your chin, telling UFO stories. It's, take it seriously. What are the real issues, the real questions? Who are the real authorities, and what could they tell us? And what don't we know that we need to know in order to make good decisions? And how do we get there? That's a conversation that just isn't happening in ufology. And I don't want to beat up on everybody. They've all got their own little fiefdom over there to work with, but I know what works and what doesn't, and what I'm watching doesn't work.
Yeah, and I want to kind of circle around to what you were saying, as well as kind of go back to that 20% you were talking about that doesn't have a good experience. I mean, the big word that I wrote down was consent. There's something going on where we're not giving consent to what's happening to some of these people, or us. So, and I'm not an experiencer, full disclosure there, but nonetheless, it's that non-consent that's really going to be something that people that are learning about this stuff say that I think there's going to be more of an uncontrolled catastrophic disclosure, because we're never going to get it from the government, especially as Adam said, we all have our theories. We know the military knows. We know that they've known about this for 80 or more years, but nonetheless, we're not going to get disclosure from them. So when it starts coming out, and people that are normal and normally don't have anything to do with UFOs are going to say, oh, wait, so now we're dealing with people that are abducted or have had exposures, and this is non-consensual. Oh my gosh, what's going on here? What's their intent? Blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, it's about, for you, UAP Med, it is about helping them. And it brings up my second question. When it comes to helping people that have been abducted and helping them deal with it, is kind of that the family issue, where a family can be abducted. It's the parents no longer have that feeling of being able to protect their children. So when people come to UAP Med looking for help and advice, I know it still must be kind of tough, because you're unable to protect them in a sense, or tell them that they'll be okay, because if they're abductees, it could continue happening. And it's actually kind of one of the questions I have here from one of the experiencers. Actually, I'll just read it off. So this one is from Deirdre. She says, the website says that they take no liability for any damages that may occur for using their medical professional directory, which is fine. But how exactly are they vetting these resources? Is there any vetting done at all? Checking licenses, that kind of thing. And the side note, or her thought, was, for those of us who went through some pretty horrible experiences, I imagine it would be like being a therapist for a patient who is a POW, and there's literally nothing the therapist can do to stop the abuse. Therapy is pretty much predicated on the idea that a victim is either past their trauma or needs help strategizing on how to escape an abusive situation. Either way, there is a sense of agency for the therapist, a way to actually help their client and make sure they are in a safe environment, or at least try in some cases. This might be a long game plan, but it's still the way that the therapist is going to operate. They're simply not equipped to deal with the situations where the client and the therapist are completely, utterly helpless.
This is a very important point. Okay. And yeah, we do vet the people that are involved with our group, but even more so, we don't provide therapy or counseling to witnesses. What we're trying to do is educate people who would. And in the process, if that educates, you know, the person with experience as well, then, you know, that's great too. But that's how we deal with it. And yes, it's I was talking to one of our clinicians the other day, and I said I compare this to like being a therapist to a guy that's serving in a frontline trench in war, right? And you run in every Wednesday and jump in the trench, and how you doing today, you know, and take a couple of notes and leave. What are you going to do? How do you actually help a person like that? And um, there is an answer to that, but it's not well understood yet. How do you stop this? How do you say no? How do you get it? How do you withdraw? How do you consent or not consent? Right? Because you're not asked. I was never asked.
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
know anybody that ever was. And so, what do you tell a therapist who's trying to help somebody who's in the throes of this, who's dealing with it? I've got lifetime exposures. They go back to when I was 5 years old, probably a couple dozen of them, you know, and there's nobody to talk to. There never was, you know, and nobody's going to be able to protect me from it. You know, there are days when I can't go outside and look up. You know, it's like that sometimes. It's real challenging. So yeah, these are all important points, and these are things that clinicians should be aware of and should be thinking about when they're around this. It's certainly going to part of our education process to inform them of that. You know, that often these things are ongoing. And it goes along with a lot of the other issues that psychologists often put up as arguments against UAP exposures. They say, well, it's sleep paralysis, you know, but that doesn't explain it when there's 3 people in the car and you're driving, you know. So what they do is they kind of find something that might fit the explanation rather than actually looking at the scope of the problem and saying what explains all of this. Because if they looked at it globally, right, you know, they would probably move to a different conclusion and a different level of engagement. But again, it includes that. You recognize this is an ongoing thing. This is happening around us all the time. We're in the middle of it. And it doesn't look like it's going to let up. Okay. And it looks like a lot more people are exposed to it than talk about it.
Yeah.
So start there, you know.
And I'll let Ben, if you had something to that, I'll let you answer. But I did want to say, in the group that we have, one of the ladies who her whole family was abducted. She tells the story of her whole family being abducted, but she said that she learned that after a while, obviously, she's not giving consent, but after a while, it becomes, I just had to just say yes, just give consent and let them do what they want, because they're going to do it anyway. So it's a tough, it's tough.
Protecting themselves. They're protecting their minds, you know.
Yeah.
They're trying to cope, and you're in a situation where it's almost like Stockholm syndrome, you know.
Yes.
And we have specialists in our group that deal with sexual assault and deal with perpetrators and counseling around all of that. And these are a lot like that: abduction and sexual assault, similar kind of thing. But then you add the weirdness to it, right? That it's not a human being, and you can't seem to stop it from happening. And it seems to be happening to people you care about, and you can't protect them. I stopped having relationships. I actually stopped dating and all of that, because the last person that was in my life had just destroyed us. And I mean, we still associate, we're still friends, but I can't bring somebody close to me that might run into that.
Right. Unless they're experiencers or people who have been exposed themselves. I've heard them, others call them normies, just or I'm sorry, people that haven't are just normal or normies or whatever. And yeah, you can't date a normie. You can only date people. Yeah. Go ahead.
And well, and my point is more about exposure. I mean, if they're somebody with an experiencer, it's even more reason not to be close to them. You don't want to bring it around you and them, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And then if you've got kids, you know, or you're around, vulnerable people, then
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you can't. And that was one of the big changes for me within all of this. Was at first, like when I had that exposure in Oakland, it was quite dramatic, and didn't it offered a lot of questions, but it also gave a lot of observations. I saw things that helped me understand a little bit.
As well as being with two other people.
Yes, and I wasn't alone, and that was all helpful. We were driving, we were all awake. There was no, we were just trying to get from point A to point B, and the at the time I thought I was pretty special. Wow, aliens come right up to my car. Hey, with luck, but of course that's not the way I reacted when it happened,
Right.
but I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought about it later, and who wants to admit that they were terrified? So, I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and that I was somebody. Finally, I had a purpose in life, and wow, what a purpose! I could get behind this, and gee, somebody who was nobody all his life is now somebody, And within 6 months, I was running NARCAP with Dr. Haynes, and Dr. Vali came on board, and it was just this whole thing. And in the meantime, I was slowly circling the drain because I wasn't coping. I had ontological shock. I was realizing that the narrative I was giving myself wasn't accurate. I was bullshitting myself, in other words. And when I started really getting down to the root of it all, I had to admit that this was not a good thing. That it wasn't good for me as a human being or an individual, and it isn't a good sign in the overall big picture. And from there, I had to start rebuilding myself. So it's a process, and you meet a lot of these people who have all this birdsong around. Oh, the aliens and blah blah blah. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been there. It passes if you really have insight. If you turn and look at yourself.
Yeah. Ben, did you want to add anything before I ask Adam if he has any questions?
Sure. The one thing I can say is it's been a stepwise process for me, with sightings through to experiences at home. And the experiences at home stopped about a couple of years ago, and I'm grateful for it. I am, because I can be in my home now. Sorry.
Please go ahead.
No, just to really quick is that part of what Ted's saying is that safety and security, and being able to be in our home now, without those things still happening, almost like its own little mini, I don't know, 0.4, 0.2, whatever acre we have property flap that happened here has moved on, I think, for the most part, except any sightings that happen above. But it was scary when it happened.
Can you describe what happened? That's what I was going to ask just a few seconds ago.
Sure. We had our sighting in Berkeley, which was a visual sighting of objects in the sky, and that was the ontological shock. And then when moving out here, luckily I was with my partner. If I wasn't with my partner, one, no one would believe anything I'm talking about, one. And two, level-headed person. And it's having that support system. Again, we talk about our experience for Bill of Rights and talking about experiencers. That support system, like, again, if it was just me, I don't know what the heck would have happened. But we were together, and so that kind of helped. But what happened here, the best way I could describe it was like something was in the house, and it was in conjunction with visual sightings, and it happened over the course of a summer. We had the sulfur odor, we had static electricity where you couldn't not touch something in the house and get buzzed, and there was, for lack of a better term, a shadow person that walked behind me, and it was something that sent me screaming out of the house at one of the highest pitched screams I think I've ever emanated from my body. But the point being is that when we're talking about invasiveness, consent, lack of any control over the situation, it's real. And I'm kind of with Ted in that I think you can take an experience, and if you want to, if it's subjective and you want to take something positive from it, or you see it in a positive way, okay, I'm happy that you can do that. Sure. But if I look at it from what happened here, if I look at it from a very, just again, I keep coming back to the word objective, I think of Dr. Carla Turner's books about how she went through those experiences and trying to share with people in the field at that time, this is not a great thing. This is me being and my family being taken advantage of. I mean, I just think it's part of the story that needs to be understood, and why therapy, why going to someone to kind of try and get help if you can is important.
Yeah.
But part of why we're here again is to get this information out to the folks who can, who are trained, who are been doing this their whole lives with different types of trauma, different types of diagnoses, and have them take that step professionally and helping folks in the way they know how. But yeah, it's a thing that can be positive. Like the ontological shock wasn't positive, but knowing that I saw something was, whoa, this is cool.
Yeah.
And I sit and I hold my head in my hands and I'm like, okay, so this is real. But when it becomes very personal, when it's in your home, when it's something you can't control, when it's something that you don't know what's going to happen next, it's not fun.
Yeah. And it is fascinating to hear that people like yourself, you saw something in the sky at first, and then there was, just as in the book Sky Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, the hitchhiker effect when you go to, like, say, the Skinwalker Ranch. But there is that type of effect, similar as you just described, you experienced, where you saw something in the sky, correct? And then shortly after that, suddenly you're having these issues in your home, and I've definitely heard of it, but it doesn't seem like you hear of it as much, because you didn't go someplace that was being haunted or the phenomenon was taking place. You simply just looked up, you saw something, and then and suddenly your mind is aware of it, and that somehow opens a door, or just seeing it, and it's just something that many people, and even myself, have a hard time grasping, that just seeing something could cause a disturbance in your life.
Yeah, I do think seeing it is one of those things where we were talking earlier, right? If a human being can see something, they want to either try and make it or take it apart or figure out how it works, right? And I think that that's part of the first part of it, is like seeing it allows your, I don't know if the best way to put it, but it allows you to it opens you up a little bit more, I guess, to what's kind of going on around you. And I don't know how that works. I don't know if it's a direct or direct relationship, if it's an indirect relationship, if it just happens to be something of the interactions with us. But that you're describing it correctly. We moved here, we looked up, we saw something again, and then suddenly there was the summer of what's going on. That's the best way to put it. The summer of what's going on, and now it's gone. We don't have that, but we still see them above, because this is a hot spot area, the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And
Ted said that, and I live in the Bay Area, as you know, and I don't see a darn thing. But it also opens up the idea, which is kind of off topic for us here, that sometimes they will allow you to see them and not everyone else can see it. So that's something else. But Ted, I did see you had something to say while Ben was talking. Did you want to add to that? And I do see we're at the over the hour mark, so just let me know if you guys don't have time.
Okay. I was going to add to it that you were mentioning the hitchhiker effect earlier. And that's been one of the questions we've been raising at UAP Med, is trying to understand whether or not whether or not people are experiencing stress-induced psi function because they're trying to live at full bandwidth because they're terrified, right? So they've had trauma, and now they're hyper aware, hyper vigilant, and using everything they've got, which includes non-local information and intuition. And Hynek mentioned in his description of people with exposures that were beyond observations, they were often called to look in the direction of the object before they knew it was there. So they would, I had to go outside. I just knew it was there. I went outside, I looked, and, it was right there, right? You hear this over and over again. So people are either physiologically sensing them in the environment, or there's something direct that's going on between them. That's what happened to me in my Oakland experience. Susan was driving, and I leaned around her and pointed out something I couldn't see and said, "No, that's unusual," and it was, and it turned out to be pretty freaking weird. And when you end up looking, the authors of these exposures in the eye, whatever the hell they are, that's sobering. It just brings you to a point where you realize, hey, a good chunk of the world is wrong about this, and if I don't watch it, I'm going to be wrong about it too. And how do I live knowing that? Knowing this, how then should I live? What should I do now? And I decided to go head on at it, and try to make change. And in the beginning, I wasn't suited for it at all. It took 20 years of looking and watching and waiting for the world to change, and then reading the room and knowing when the timing was right to even bother trying to do this kind of work. But I think our timing is good, and it's not the toothpaste isn't going back in the tube. The government might wash its hands of it, but this isn't going to stop.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Adam, did you want to ask a question or add anything to that?
I think really it's like where to begin when it comes to like the associations between like a sighting or an experience. I know personally that really there does seem to be some, I don't know, almost like lingering attachment. And I know Carla Turner's work was mentioned, but it's probably about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I started reading that book because I was just interested in her experiences, because she was more, I guess, critical about it. Where in Leaf mentioned consent. That's very, to me, a huge part of this whole thing. Where you have the idea that there's these beings that are so intelligent. They have these psychic abilities that we don't have the complete control. All these technology, but when it comes down to actually respect of boundaries and consent of like another sentient being, doesn't seem to be there. So to me, like that's just like a giant light bulb goes off in my head and says, whoa, these two things don't really make sense. Because if I'm dealing with another intelligent person, they're going to give consent. There's going to be boundaries. There's going to be respect. It's going to be a two-way street, but you really only see a one-way street from a lot of these experiences. I'm not okay with that. And I think, that core paradigm is like a really big reason why a lot of people have negative experiences, and they belief systems drastically change, and they can create so many different timelines. And some, you can have an experience for one person, they can see it as like liberating and that kind of archetype, or you can have another person have similar experience and it's really dark. It's it leads almost to like a more dismal timeline. So it's very hard to really measure and quantify like these experiences, because it's semi like subjective how somebody takes it. But back to Carla Turner, I remember, just kind of reading some of that, just like the first chapter or two, and I didn't have good experiences that night. It was not, I definitely, there is attachment to work. I don't know if there's things that are still lingering, or if it's just me, but maybe I just have a sensitivity to it. But things like that can happen. So very, very interesting to really have a conversation about, family, like, genetics seem to be involved, family history and all that stuff seems to be very related. But I always, caution people to, find out as much information as you can if you, have some of these experiences, or these experiences have happened to you, so you can essentially protect yourself in certain ways, the best ways you can, at least psychologically. If you can't do it like physically, in case of like an abduction or something like that, you can at least have some sort of defense mechanism, at least. Just don't go, if you're going out in the middle of the woods and you don't have minimal supplies, you should probably at least learn how to make a fire. So that's a very bad analogy, but it's there are things we can do at this point in time. And humans have been here for a while, and there's like a lot of there is a lot of interesting things you can look at in terms of like psychic defense and all that other things. But everybody's different. You got to find what works for you. So it really is like experimentation and practice is my perspective of it. So whatever could work for you, if you're, and can alleviate like symptoms or any type of residual from any type of experience that you're not happy with.
I'd like to add, or ask, does UAP Med have anything on the website about common disorders that many people who've been exposed have, such as, and I have a list that the experiencers in our Discord created. Well, this one's pretty interesting. Eye color changes with mood, but blood type, rashes from the sun, fibromyalgia, anxiety, and CPTSD, being a feeling of being an empath, inner ear fluid leaks after too much salt, sugar, caffeine, Meniere's disease, dizziness, vertigo, and then the common one that I think is common that most people talk about the most is just when being near things, you run down batteries or you affect devices, street lamps. And then we already talked about kind of the hitchhiker effect and ear ringing, I guess. Yeah. And that's the short list that we have here. But is there anything to tell psychologists or therapists that, hey, you could also look out for these type of disorders that seem to, I don't want to say plague, but seem to run among people who have been exposed?
You want to take that, Ben?
What I can say to that is the UAP Med right now, we have a health effects checklist on our website that any professional can go to, download, and look for signs and symptoms of UAP exposure or NHI exposure. To that point, when we come to differential diagnosis, what I would say is look to the literature. We're in the process of creating documents now and publications that'll be useful for professionals to possibly start down that path, I would say. But if you're looking at the literature right now, there have been quite a few great articles published that show the different types of mental health disorders that can align with folks who believe they've seen UAP or experienced UAP or NHI, and at the same time showing how they are not the same as those who might have those disorders on their own. So it really comes down to, I would say, the professional themselves being able to kind of know what they know about these different mental health disorders, and then kind of take what is being produced, what we're producing, and kind of putting them side by side, and kind of start to parse that out themselves. Again, like Ted had said, UAP Med, we're not here to provide therapy, provide that kind of help. We're here to help the professionals help them. And so that would be my best answer to it. Not being a psychologist or psychiatrist, I wouldn't feel comfortable making any of those type of claims just from myself, if that's okay.
Let me add to that too, in that we're not operating in a vacuum. The AIAA program that I work with is working on detection modalities to learn how to spot these things when they're around. And they're not the only ones. I mentioned the Tedesco case, John and Jerry. These guys, just for your audience, had an exposure while they were doing field work, watching UFOs on the shore of Long Island, on the edge of Whiskey 72, where Ryan Graves and those guys were dealing with it as pilots. And they got a good deal of data out of it. And they also got exposures themselves that included paralysis and other physiological symptoms. So when you're looking at these cases, you're not just looking at the person who's got the exposures. There have been physiological effects documented and engaged on, and they can account for witnesses' claims of one type or another. One of the things that we saw was a relaxed paralysis, where they just lose control of their limbs, right? They just flop into a pile. And then the other thing that they had was swollen lymph glands, which might be radioactive exposure of some kind or another. But we did have a group of cognitive scientists, neurobiologists get together and kind of talk about what the mechanism would have been that would have knocked these guys down and made them, had them drop into a relaxed paralysis. And it all seemed to fall back to IR band exposures. And the UFO that they were assaulted by, they had been watching in infrared. It wasn't visible to the naked eye. And they provoked it by painting it with an IR detector, or an IR emitter, excuse me. And they painted it 4 times, nothing happened. The 5th time, something happened. And so they provoked it. And they've been doing this all summer. So that case, Tedesco, John and Jerry, and it's on our UAP Med YouTube channel, the actual videos and interviews with them. And then our follow-ups on that, which included talking about first responders and how what they need to be able to consider if they come into a situation where a UAP has been sighted. One, do they know it's gone? Because just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there, right? They can leave your visual spectrum, and I've seen them do this myself. And then, so how do you empower an incident commander or somebody, like in the case of like the Phoenix Lights? How do you empower them to be able to actually see what's going on and do what needs to be done? That case is kind of an extreme example where the whole city was shut down basically for hours because UFOs were over the town. That was March of 1997. And, if you had a heart attack in that particular time, you weren't going to get the help you needed. Emergency services were blocked. Everything was blocked, right? Nobody had an answer to how to deal with this. It flew over the airport. The air traffic control didn't have an answer to how to deal with it. So it's kind of an extreme case, but it kind of gives you an example of why we want to be working across the spectrum in our society to make sure that people are prepared from various angles. I've worked with aviation and aviation safety for 25 years, and this involves the flying public. It's civil aviation, and the pilots have the same kinds of issues that any other person with UFO exposures has, on top of the responsibility for 100 souls or whatever on their aircraft. So all of this it comes back. I would remind any clinician or anybody who with a very specific skill set to remember that they aren't just looking at witnesses. There's a larger context in all of this. And if you want to understand it and you need information, there are clues. You can go look. And a lot of very good people are working on this, which hasn't been true before. Science is engaging. Our human factors group over at AIAA, our hardware group over there, that's just at AIAA. There are companies that are working on this. So just an FYI.
Okay. So again, we are over the hour, and I hope you guys have some time. I was going to say, so some of these questions that I did get from the experiencers, a few of the experiencers, I think are kind of based on thinking that UAP Med is a service, and instead of you guys are actually out there to inform the medical community. So I'm trying to figure out, because I was just going to say I'll just go down the list of some of the questions. And again, I'll just say the questions, and obviously if they're pointed towards UAP giving services, then you can just say, okay, obviously it's not it. But do you know that whether UAP Med has been able to help many experiencers?
Well, I don't know about many intentionally, but I think we've helped quite a few just knowing we exist. Mm-hmm. I know when I watch our experiencer videos and stuff, I feel better.
Excellent.
That's kind of the test for me. So, okay. But no, I don't think the world knows as much about us as it should.
Okay. Does UAP Med feel that the resources it links to and the connections it has to threat experiencers along are adequate to serve the needs of that demographic?
Well, we could always use more and better information. You know, and in fact, we're setting up a new website, and that's going to have a little bit of a different layout and some kind of a different series of connections to it that might help that question a little better.
Okay. Is that website going to be part of UAP Med?
Yeah, it'll be the new UAP Med website.
Oh, okay.
We're
This the site looks very nice too. So you're going to upgrade it even more. That's great.
Oh, yeah.
And I must say I do love the UFO UAP connections section. That's a great section you have there.
You know, that was somebody in our group who has since stepped back, but she does terrific work. I always thought she was a great researcher, and
great.
I can't use her name because she'd asked me not to, but you know,
that's fine.
It's a great resource. Yeah,
excellent. Are experiencers more likely to suffer negative effects as a result of being abductees, contactees, i.e., from actively interacting with UAP pilots or beings associated with the UAP phenomenon, whether physically, astrally, or psionically, or from exposure to UAPs themselves? The UAP Med Safety Blueprint does not make mention of interactions with UFO knots.
Yeah. It's a work in progress. And we're kind of feeling our way through the swamp, you know.
Okay.
And what we can talk about, what we can't, how we can engage on it, and how we can't. And frankly, we don't have the expertise in our group to be telling people how to talk to a non-human intelligence that's smarter than we are, or is as smart as we are, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, I spent a lot of time swimming with dolphins, but you know, even there's a limit, you know, what you can pull out of it. And I don't have the answers for people like that. That's been part of our problem with UAP Med, is that we do get approached by people in need who clearly have issues, you know, and deserve attention. And we're not the ones to give it to them. The best we can do is inform another clinician that somebody's struggling, you know. Mm-hmm. But even that we have to be careful about. You can't give referrals. So,
okay. Yeah.
Ben, would you like to add to that in terms of like HIPAA and any of that stuff that we walk around the edges on?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at I would say the Experiencer Bill of Rights is a great thing to look at in regards to this question. You know, part of what you're saying there, Ted, is, you know, we want privacy for individuals. We want that security, and we want to make sure that any individuals, you know, who have this experience and feel like talking about it, have that informed consent as well. They're not just put out there. And I would say, you know, it's a great question, but for us, like we said earlier, you know, we look at peer-reviewed research, we're looking at hard data, and we're looking at things that are, I would say, more tangible and objective. And when it comes to exposure to you, let's say the pilots, personally, I haven't come across any hard data yet to tell me one way or another. And again, we're talking about nuts and bolts versus a biological being. And those are two very different things with different interactions. And that's something that would need to be parsed out each in their own right, and how they kind of may come back together. There are just a lot of questions we don't know. You know, you were saying earlier, Ted, a lot about the dolphins. Well, part of how I kind of also think of this is two bears are in the woods, and one bear gets tagged and the other bear doesn't. And this bear gets tagged with an ID number, so a researcher at the University of Washington State University can check this bear and monitor its progress throughout its whole life. But the bear can't talk to the person can't talk to the bear doesn't understand that the person is maybe trying to help their population, that they can't do naturally on their own anymore due to being endangered. This is just an example, right? But the bear may run across another bear and say, and again, hey, this happened. And the other bear's like, well, I've been walking around these woods for 20 years, and that's never happened to me, but it just happened to not be that bear. And so what I think what happens is it's to have that conversation between the bears about something that they can't have a conversation necessarily with. It's a very difficult thing to do, I would say. Another way to kind of look at it is, at least for me, is I'm walking around my backyard, And within my backyard, there are microenvironments within microenvironments within microenvironments that will never know that there's a human being walking around that has an intent to do something to make their yard look nicer. But they may encounter that human being's foot, and all they'll ever know is that piece of the foot. And so for me, and I would say for us here at UAP Med, the goal again is to get the right information to the right professionals to help each individual who wants to have a more centeredness, a wholeness after the experience, something that helps them move forward. And I think that's the goal at the end of all of this, right? Is helping, if we can, helping people move forward to a life that's I don't know, more positive, more manageable. And I think when you start to ask questions about intent or the exposure to these individual beings where we don't know if is it grays and other types of species, that's again a whole other myriad of questions. We wouldn't know how would a quote unquote reptilian interact with us versus and in our physical space, let alone communicating. So I just think those are open-ended questions, and while they're interesting, unfortunately, it'd be something that's very difficult to address from our perspective.
I think that, it's a lot like trying to describe Nevada by saying it isn't like Hawaii. When you're talking about a non-human intelligence, you don't know their biological or cultural imperatives. You don't know what drives them. You don't know how they communicate, and you don't know what they value. But what's important is knowing that, so it helps you understand the boundary areas, and then it helps us adapt to it, because we don't know those things. But that doesn't mean we can't have judgment and say, you know what, this is not acceptable. And until these, unlike the bears, we can be talked to, and I have no reason to think that they can't talk to us if they choose to. Again, whether they're honest and whether you can trust what you're hearing, and whether it's relevant is anybody's guess. But if they're not talking to us, we're left to our own judgment over whether this is acceptable to us or not. And also, we're left with, it isn't talking to us, so what does that tell us? What does it tell us about them and how they organize and what they do? And then observe. Mm-hmm. We need larger data samples. We need to talk to more people with exposures. There's a lot that needs to be done. And this is all very formative. This is a beginning science, and I've watched the growing pains with the engineers and astrophysicists and various folks at American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which is very mainstream. The largest professional society of aeronautical and astronautical sciences in the world. And they're just getting started on this, and they aren't coming from a place of common knowledge. So even trying to figure out which direction to go in and what to research is hard for them. And this is kind of where all of the sciences are right now, whether it's a quote soft science like psychology, or whether it's something more demanding like medicine or physics. It's all very formative. So, what you don't want to do if you're going to look into this subject at all is ignore the fact that there's a lot of unknowns, and there are people looking at them. Don't just say, well, looks to me like these people are deluded, so I'm walking away. That's not how you answer this problem.
One question that it's an interesting one, the second half. We're clearly not at the point that I can walk into my local doctor's surgery to see a poster up on the wall advertising UAP Med services. Again, you don't offer services. You're talking to the medical community about it. Where are they looking to take their advocacy and work next to spread awareness and ensure greater visibility to the wider public?
Sure. So we're looking to that point, we're looking to spread our awareness first and foremost, to professionals. So our goal is to have content, information, and things that they can hold in their hands, download, things that they can put up in their office, things that they can refer to, for professionals to help patients in that regard. Like they're saying, yes, if you went in now, I went into a doctor's office and said I was just exposed to a UAP, and I'm not sure what should I do next. The doctor at this point isn't not going to know what to do next. But if you walk in and say I was exposed to UAP and now there's this rising rash on my arm, doctor, can you take a look at that? What we're hoping to do is to help help that communication for physicians, for psychologists, for psychiatrists to start picking up these things, noticing these things, have the information on hand for themselves. So when they see it, they know what they're looking at. They know how to identify it, possibly how to triage it, uh, how to approach this kind of exposure. Um, to that point as well, we're looking, like Ted was saying, we have student groups, we have advocacy that we're looking to do up for both local communities, statewide communities, federal, and a lot of that's being percolated now. Is what I can say to it. But that is our goal: is to make sure that this information is communicated across across the spectrum to different peoples and different levels of society, how, where, and when they need it most.
The recently, I believe through Dr. Taylor's machinations, Dr. Keith Taylor, that the major cities police forces put out a document briefing on UAP and UAP exposures and who to report to. All of that came out and were distributed to 79 of the major jurisdictions in the country. Now, whether anybody opened those things, actually read them, or there were any meetings held to talk about it or anything, would probably be a disappointing study. But it's indicative that there are attempts to move information and that to raise awareness on the subject. And awareness is really the key. It's at the heart of all of this. Are you aware enough to know what's going on around you? And from that awareness, can you deduce what should be done? Clearly comprehending, right? So that's kind of the process we're at. We're in the awakening moment right now. We had the disclosure in June of 2021. Then we have the exploitation and containment moment, and that's kind of what we're in right now. The military's trying to keep a lid on it and play it all down and so on, which we pay them well to do, but then there's the other side, which is not doing that. We have, like I said, we have companies, businesses taking on UAP issues. And there's hard study going on, hard science, physics. So, it's a formative moment. And moving that information, part of it's just being the ones that have it. Nobody else is really taking this on this way, and I'm not going to name any names or anything, but I just think that what I'm seeing out there probably isn't going to be as effective as they'd want it to be,
Right. Yeah. So. It makes me think of the skinwalkers at the Pentagon book where the Bigelow Institute, BASS, they were very, very particular on getting the science of the effects of these things and how they affect people. And that definitely seems like it's important information for clinicians and doctors and stuff to know what kind of things they might expect when someone says just what you were saying. I've been exposed to a UAP and now I got this rash. Help. So say, oh yeah, okay. It might be radiation burn, who knows?
Well, the problem is that a lot of those documents and all are not good. They're not helpful. The DIRDs that came out in 2010 and so on. They're more kind of surveys of what was known in ufology at the time. They're not deep documents, and they don't really they aren't really strongly supported in their assertions. Their references are not strong. And to I've been around Bigelow and all of that since I started into this, and I met first time I met him was in 1986, before either one of us were doing UFO stuff. Um, so there's there's a lot of approaches to all of this, and if they worked, they'd be working. And what we have is a lot of kind of political theater going on right now, and people trying to perform for that, and people chasing clout, and trying to be part of these things. And I just want to put it behind me. I want to move away from it, as much as I can, and just try to serve, do the compassionate thing here, serve. There's a problem here. People have issues. They're not getting help. And I tell this story, but I'm going to tell it again just because I'm old and I tell stories over and over again. But this one involved a woman who called me right after we got UAP Med started, back when I was still running it with my phone in the jungle. And she calls me up. She said, "My husband just left. I only have a minute. I have to talk to you." And I said, "Well, go ahead." She was elderly compared to me. And she said that, in 1972 or 3, that she had woken up under a UFO in her backyard, half naked. And that she had taken to tying herself to her kids' furniture because her husband's worked nights. So, and her family had made fun of her for about 50 years over this, over her terror. And it was just such a sad story. And here it was just, she was just telling me, and I'm out there in the middle of nowhere just going, wow, do I know how you feel? I do know how you feel. And all I could do was listen. And right in the middle of it, the husband returned. She hung up. I never heard from her again. Okay. But this is somebody who's carried not only the trauma of the exposure, but the abuse of her family for all these years and needed somebody to hear her, and that alone makes it worth it, to do it, to try and help those people. And for me, it was the same thing. I suffered a lot, while I was running NARCAP because I couldn't talk about what I'd been through. And nobody was asking. All these brilliant people around me, nobody was asking me if I was okay. Everybody was stuck on their image and their, how they were trying to look and who they were trying to be seen standing next to. And, but I remember I was talking to Dr. Valee and Dr. Haynes both, and I said, "Hey, do you really think this is serving us by comparing them to fairies and making coffee table books? Because we really need more than that." And that's not to denigrate Dr. Valee, but it really, the point is, these are brilliant minds and this is what they're preoccupied with rather than helping, really helping, so just a point I wanted to share.
That's actually a good segue into this. Probably I'll make it the final question from the experiencers, but so this is apparently, I think you're on Twitter. It's a good segue because you were just talking about this person calling you and talking to you and just having someone to talk to. So this is, I guess, just to clear things up with your perception of how experiencers should handle talking with others. So the question is, in previous conversations with experiencers, you've said that those with exposures shouldn't be talking with other experiencers, but should be seeking to speak with their therapists. You've implied it's not good for experiencers to talk to each other. Do you still believe this? And if so, why? Why is it dangerous for experiencers to speak with one another, in your opinion? Ted. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a misunderstanding there.
Okay, that's what I figured. Yeah,
I certainly don't have a problem with people talking to each other, but what I do think is that if they want help, they need to talk to a professional. They need to talk to somebody who is, and this might be where I was misunderstood, because I've asserted this before, that you need to talk to somebody who's accountable for what they say and do in your head. You can't just have a weekender or hypnotherapist banging around inside of you and then walking away and not being accountable, so if you really want help, get it from somebody that is responsible, that is there to do that, and listen to them. And if they aren't working, go find another one, because there's a lot of them and they don't always agree. But but yeah, that's my suggestion over the current groups, for example, that kind of get together. They can do a lot of damage. I've tried to join several of them, and what you find in now this probably isn't true in all of them, but what I've found is that you end up with dominant personalities in these groups that sort of steer everybody else, and they can become abusive. I've had refugees from these groups come to me and say, "Hey, well, so and so treated me this way, and I feel terrible, and blah blah blah. What can I do?" And my point is, you can't do anything. You joined a group, and if you want to be in a situation where you really are getting help, get somebody who's competent and qualified to give it to you, pay them for it, and hold them accountable.
And maybe join a group that's not as that doesn't have one of those types or several of those types.
Well, that's the other thing, and this is something we're going to offer some guidance on. Is there are different types of groups, and there's encounter groups, and there's therapy groups, and there's different types of groups. But if you're in a group with 80 other people, that's not going to do you any good. Well, the best therapy groups are 8 to 10 people. They're led by a clinician. And they're checking in with you week by week by week. How are you doing? How are you doing? Did anything trigger you this week? What did you do to offset that? Are you okay? And it's a small enough thing where it can be done in an hour and a half. And help somebody, literally, helping them in a real way versus getting together. And I mean, I remember I went to a group one time, and they were all over me, telling me about what I was experiencing and why, and how the Galactic Federation was involved, and just a lot of damage. It's not good stuff, and it didn't. I walked away disenchanted. I didn't feel good about any of that, and that's all part of the reason that gave me the momentum eventually to do the work I'm doing now.
Yeah, because I'll say, just from that, that statement you said is one thing I find hard about those groups is they also talk in absolutes, as though they know that what their information is the right information, and it is exactly how the universe is working. And I don't want to say I fear, but I don't like hearing people talking as though they know exactly what's going on. It's
well, the expectation is that you will conform to their worldview, and then you will feel better because you see the world the way they do, and this is what it is, and now they know, and they don't know. They do not know, and you're messing with your own head by getting involved in that kind of a situation. So, be discerning. Bring your awareness and that hypervigilance on the UFO side, and use a little bit on the people that you encounter. Anybody that tells you they've got all the answers in this, shun that.
Yeah, walk away.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that too, because every experiencer I've ever spoken with, they have different experiences. It's not always the same type of gray that it's always a different gray, and the information they get from these aliens or ETs is always different. There's always a different message. Sure, there's the similar threads going through these messages, yeah, but it's never the exact same experience. So yeah, it is tough with some of those groups, because like you said, some of them want them to align to want you to align to their thinking and how the universe works. So I agree with that. Yeah,
sure. I wanted to ask you,
yeah,
Leif, who found that video of me from 1992?
Oh, that is okay. And I will show the video, since I'm editing this, because it was Remzi. Rem is our founder of UFOB, and he is the man that is always that he's the one that has populated our YouTube channel with over 500 videos, I believe, and he is the master of finding things on YouTube. And he was going to be here, and he said, "Oh, I want to show Ted the video and talk about that." So I'll definitely link the video on here. But do you have anything to say about that video?
Well, that was 1992, and it was long before I ever got publicly involved with the UFO matter, but I was in motion on it. And an AV group at UC Berkeley was doing they just had a project and they wanted to interview UFO experiencers. So I stepped up and they interviewed my grandparents who were present during the incident that I describe in that video. And then I interviewed for that, but that was my first time in front of a camera on the subject ever. And at the time, it was kind of sobering for me to see it again, because at the time I'd already knew that I was going to have more exposures. The odds were that there was more coming, and that I needed to be more prepared than I was. And I was right. And then after that, it was in that time that I started noticing Dr. Haynes quite a bit, Dr. Richard Haynes. I'd see him on, videos and this kind of thing. And I liked the way he was conservative and the way he would talk about it from a science perspective, and that how careful he was and what he wouldn't say. I thought, gee, it'd be great to work with somebody of that caliber, and then about 8 years later, I end up working for him. I end up, being his executive director and running NARCAP for him. A lot of weird synchronicities like that in my own experience, but that video,
And go ahead. Sorry.
No, it takes me back. I was in an apartment in Berkeley, and it just, that my kid saw it and he was just like, wow, Dad, that's our place. Those are our plants, that's our stuff, and, it was good.
Right.
It was good.
Well, I found it. Here it is. Let's see. Do you guys see that? There he is. 1992.
My name is Ted Rowe. I'm a stockbroker in San Francisco. We were on a road trip in Montana near Lincoln in the mountains, heading west towards Idaho. My grandparents, my Aunt Brenda, my brother, and myself. And
that's you. And the link will be in the description for anyone that's interested. But
what's interesting about that is I have that ass backwards. I was heading eastbound towards Lincoln over Rogers Pass, and I had it all backwards when I actually told the story there. The material story is still the way it was, but we were going the opposite direction.
You mean you were a misinformation agent, Ted?
Yeah, CIA right there, CIA.
Trying to lead people the opposite direction.
Yeah, deep state. Watch it.
Yeah, that's funny. That's interesting that number one, Rem found it, and that you, I guess, hadn't seen it in 30 years, probably.
It was on VHS.
Okay.
It was a cartridge. I never that thing was never made to DVD that I know of. And I don't think it was widely distributed. It was the AV Club at Berkeley.
Yeah.
So however it got out there in the world, I have no idea, but there it is. And, and I don't feel bad about it. I mean, that was then and this is now. And a lot of water under the bridge.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I didn't look, but I'm wondering how long that this video, it was, I don't know.
I think it was just a snippet.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it probably was, because it is only, it's only 2 minutes. So yeah, it is a snippet.
Right. I actually had like 8 or 10 minutes of interview in that thing. But yeah. So yeah, that was kind of trippy. I'd shaved my beard off the night after they shot the first part. So I showed up in the second one without my beard and my hair out, But,
they're like, what are you doing?
Back then I was working at Charles Schwab in San Francisco, and dealing with it was a whole different world then. Bart.
Well, still goes to show that everyday regular people and professionals of all types experience this.
That's right.
And that's important to remember, because even as Gary Nolan has even said that he's experienced the Greys in his bedroom. So yeah, and that's why he comes to this from a scientific perspective. And
right.
I love his way of his view of the world and how he approaches things.
Yep.
With that. Well, thank you, Ted, and thank you, Ben, for coming on. Again, it's unfortunate that Ron wasn't able to be here for us to talk to. So we will hit up Ron to see if he'll come on and get some information from him, because as you said, he's been doing this for a lifetime. So it'll be really interesting to hear what he has to say. But again, thank you, Ted and Ben. I'll say thanks to everyone watching, and thanks again, Adam, for being here as well to ask those great questions. And we'll see you guys again. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.